She was sitting across from me in the mediation room, her face a mask of practiced indignation. Her lawyer, a sharp-suited man with the eyes of a shark, had just finished a 10-minute monologue about my supposed emotional neglect, my workaholism, my failure to appreciate the vibrant, wonderful woman my wife was. Chloe nodded along, dabbing at a dry eye with a tissue. She thought this was the final act, the part where she secured her comfortable future. She had no idea the play was mine, and she was just a character who had forgotten her lines. She thought she was divorcing a simple contractor. She was about to find out how wrong she was. It's funny what a person can miss when they're not really looking. For 10 years, she had never truly looked at me. But everyone in that room was about to see exactly who I was. My name is Mark. I'm 42 years old, and for most of my adult life, I've owned and operated a small, specialized construction company. We built custom homes, difficult renovations, projects that required a craftsman's touch, not just a crew of laborers. I liked the work. I liked the dust, the smell of cut lumber, the satisfaction of seeing a blueprint turn into a place where a family would live. I came home tired, my hands calloused, and I thought that was a good life. I thought Chloe respected it. I thought she loved me. But let me start from the beginning, from the exact moment the foundation of my life cracked clean in two. It was a Tuesday night. I had just gotten home from a long day on a site in the north end of town, a tricky heritage home restoration that was fighting me every step of the way. I was rinsing sawdust and grime from my hands at the kitchen sink when my phone buzzed on the granite countertop. It was a notification from Chloe. I smiled, thinking it was a text asking what I wanted for dinner. We had fallen into a comfortable, if somewhat distant, routine. I did my work. She did hers. She was a brand consultant for high-end boutiques, a job that seemed to involve a lot of long lunches and social media posts. I picked up the phone. It wasn't a text message. It was a voice memo. I found that odd. Chloe was a texter, a rapid-fire succession of short sentences and emojis. A voice memo felt strangely intimate or lazy. I dried my hands on a towel and pressed play, expecting to hear a grocery list or a reminder to pick up the dry cleaning. Instead, a voice I didn't recognize filled my kitchen. It was male, smooth, with a lazy arrogance that set my teeth on edge. "God, I can't wait to get you out of there," he was saying, his voice low and conspiratorial. Does he have any idea? The big, dumb builder, playing with his hammers while we're planning to take over the world. Then I heard her laugh. It was a sound I knew better than my own heartbeat, but this version was different. It was cruel. "Sure, Julian, don't be awful," she purred. But there was no heat in her defense. "He has no clue. He thinks my consulting business is finally taking off. He doesn't even look at the credit card statements. He just works, eats, and sleeps." It's almost sad my hand, which had been reaching for a glass, froze in midair. The water was still running in the sink, a steady, unconcerned hiss. "It is sad," Julian's voice continued, "but his sadness is our gain. How much longer until you tell him? Once the Henderson account comes through, we can get that place in the city. You won't ever have to smell sawdust again, my love. Just the ocean and my expensive cologne." There was a soft, wet sound, a kiss. "I have to go. Just wanted you to know I'm thinking of you. I'm thinking of our new life. Send me something back to hold me over." The memo ended. I stood there for a full minute, the sound of the running water the only thing in the room. I didn't feel anger, not at first. What I felt was a profound, chilling clarity. It was as if I had been looking at a blurry photograph for a decade, and in 30 seconds, it had snapped into sharp, brutal focus. The late nights, she said, were networking, the expensive business trips to boutique hotels. The way she would subtly mock my work clothes or the dirt under my fingernails. It wasn't just discontent. It was a plan. A long, calculated deception. She hadn't just cheated. She was plotting an extraction. My first instinct was primal. I wanted to smash something. I wanted to storm into the living room where she was probably scrolling through Instagram, and I wanted to see her face when I played her own words back to her. But then another instinct took over, one honed by years of dealing with complex structural problems. You don't take a sledgehammer to a load-bearing wall without knowing what will happen next. You assess. You plan. You deconstruct carefully, ensuring the whole thing doesn't come crashing down on your head. I reached out a steady hand and turned off the water. The silence that followed was absolute. I saved the voice memo. I backed it up to my cloud storage, then emailed a copy to a private account I kept for business contracts. Evidence. The word echoed in my mind. This was no longer a marriage. It was a hostile takeover, and I had just intercepted the enemy's battle plans. I walked out of the kitchen, my face a carefully constructed mask of weary neutrality. Chloe was on the sofa, bathed in the blue light of her phone. She glanced up, a fleeting, dismissive smile on her lips. "Hey, honey, tough day?" she asked, her eyes already dropping back to the screen. "The usual," I said, my voice even. "I'm going to take a shower." I didn't wait for a reply. In the bathroom, I locked the door and leaned against it, my heart finally beginning to pound in my chest. The hurt was there, a deep, septic wound. But beneath it, something else was crystallizing. Resolve. She called me a big, dumb builder. She thought I was simple. She had no idea of the resources at my disposal, the life I had carefully hidden from her, from everyone. I had built that shield for a reason, to find someone who would love me, not my bank account. And in the most painful way possible, the shield had worked. It had shown me exactly who she was, a person who valued things over people. I stood under the hot spray of the shower and let the water wash over me. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to cry. I was going to build a case. I was going to dismantle her plan with the same methodical precision I used to frame a house. And when I was done, she would be left with nothing but the rubble of her own greed. As the steam filled the bathroom, I made a single phone call. "David," I said when he answered. "It's Mark. I need to see you." First thing in the morning, David was my oldest friend since kindergarten. He was also the sharpest corporate lawyer in the state and the only person on earth, besides my accountant, who knew the full truth about my financial situation. There was a pause on the other end of the line. David knew my voice. He knew my cadence. He could hear the steel that had replaced my usual weary tone. "My office, 7 a.m., he said. "Is it what we always talked about?" "It is," I replied. "It's time." I slept in the guest room that night. When Chloe asked why, I just mumbled something about snoring and a bad back. She accepted it without a second thought, already turning over to go to sleep. Her indifference was another small piece of evidence, another confirmation of the truth I now faced. I lay awake for hours, not in turmoil, but in thought. I mapped out the next few months in my head. I created flowcharts, risk assessments, and contingency plans. The emotional part of my brain had been cordoned off. The builder, the planner, the strategist, that part was now in complete control. The next morning, I was at David's office before the sun was fully up. His firm occupied the top 3 floors of the tallest building in the city, a sleek tower of glass and steel that I, under a series of shell corporations, happened to own. He met me with 2 cups of black coffee in his hand and a grim look on his face. We sat in his vast corner office, the city waking up below us. I didn't waste time with small talk. I took out my phone, placed it on the polished mahogany desk between us, and pressed play. David listened to the entire 30-second memo without a flicker of expression. When it was over, he leaned back in his leather chair and steepled his fingers. He was silent for a long time, his gaze fixed on the skyline. "Well," he finally said, his voice quiet but firm, "the good news is she's an idiot. She handed you the loaded gun and a signed confession. What's the bad news?" I asked. "The bad news is this is going to be ugly, Mark. But we can make it ugly for her, not for you. The first rule is absolute silence. You do not confront her. You do not let her know that you know. From this moment on, you are the same man you were yesterday. You go to work, you come home, you act normal. Your silence is our most powerful weapon. She will mistake it for ignorance. She will get bolder. She will make more mistakes. And you will be there to document every single 1 inch he was right. My anger was a liability. My pain was a weakness. My strategic advantage was her complete and utter underestimation of me. She saw a simple man with a simple life. She had no concept of the corporate structures, the trusts, the layers of legal protection I had built around my assets over the past 2 decades. I had created Mark the contractor as a way to live a normal life, to do the work I loved without the complications and sycophants that extreme wealth attracted. Chloe had fallen for the disguise, but not in the way I had hoped. She hadn't loved the man. She had merely tolerated him while despising his perceived station. "So what's the first step?" I asked, taking a sip of the hot, bitter coffee. "First, we protect you," David said, already pulling a legal pad toward him and starting to write. "We'll begin the process of formally walling off all premarital assets. The trust already protects the bulk of it, but we need to ensure any marital income that might have bled over is accounted for and firewalled. Second, you hire a private investigator. I have the best. He's discreet and thorough. We need photos, videos, a detailed record of her activities with this Julian character. Third, I want you to get a full forensic accounting of every shared bank account, credit card, and investment for the past 5 years. We need to see where the money has been going." He looked up at me, his eyes serious. "This is going to feel like a second job, Mark, and it's going to hurt. You're going to have to go home every night to a woman who is actively betraying you and pretend that everything is fine. Can you do that?" I thought of her cruel laughter in the voice memo. I thought of the condescending way she said, "Big, dumb builder." I thought of the years I had given her, the honest work and devotion she had treated as a temporary inconvenience. "Yes," I said, my voice flat and hard. "I can do that." The next 3 months were the longest of my life. I lived a double existence. By day, I was Mark the contractor, managing my small crew, dealing with suppliers, and solving problems on job sites. By night, I became a quiet spymaster in my own home. I played the part of the devoted, slightly oblivious husband to perfection. I'd ask about her day, listen to her fabricated stories of meetings and client successes, and nod along with a tired smile. All the while, an email folder on my secure server was growing, filling with evidence that would eventually bring her world crashing down. The private investigator, a former police detective named Miller, was worth every penny. He provided a daily report, complete with time-stamped photos. I saw Chloe and Julian having lunch at expensive restaurants, holding hands. I saw them checking into a boutique hotel on a Wednesday afternoon, a day she had told me was filled with back-to-back client meetings. I saw him driving her car, the one I had paid for in cash as a birthday gift. Each photo was a small, sharp jab to the heart, but I filed them away with cold detachment. They were just data points, exhibits for a case I was building. The forensic accountant uncovered what I already suspected. Chloe had been systematically siphoning money from our joint accounts for over a year. Small transfers at first, then larger ones, all funneled into an account under her name only. She had also been using our shared credit cards for Julian's expenses. Designer clothes, expensive dinners, even a down payment on a sports car lease. She had stolen over $100,000. All while complaining to me that we needed to tighten our belts. The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. Meanwhile, Chloe was becoming more brazen. Believing my lack of suspicion was a sign of stupidity, she escalated her plans. She started talking about us selling our house. "It's too much for us, Mark," she'd say, looking around the beautiful home I had designed and built for us with my own hands. "It's a seller's market. We could downsize, invest the profit. It would give me the capital I need to really expand my business." I knew what she meant. It would give her the capital to run away with Julian. "We can think about it," I'd reply, my tone non-committal, before changing the subject to a leaky faucet or a problem with a supplier. Her frustration was palpable. She wanted me to move faster, to liquidate our life so she could begin her new one. Her mother, a woman who had always viewed me with a certain level of disdain, began to call more often, echoing Chloe's points. "Chloe has so much potential, Mark," she'd say in her cloying voice. "You can't hold her back with your simple ambitions. A man should support his wife's dreams." They were a tag team of greed and condescension. I politely endured their calls, every word another nail in their collective coffin. The most difficult part was maintaining my composure day in and day out. There were moments I wanted to throw the evidence in her face, to see the shock and fear replace the smug confidence in her eyes. But David's voice was a constant presence in my head. Let her build her own cage, Mark. Just keep handing her the materials, so I did. When she wanted a new laptop for her business, I bought her the top-of-the-line model, knowing full well it was a gift for Julian. I even installed tracking software on it before I gave it to her. When she claimed she needed to attend a branding conference in Miami for a long weekend, I told her to have a great time, knowing from Miller's report that Julian had a matching ticket. While she was busy planning her escape, I was busy building my fortress. On David's advice, I began the quiet, legal process of restructuring my corporate holdings. My main company, Sterling Developments, was a behemoth that no one associated with my name. We had projects all over the country. My small construction company, Mark's Quality Builds, was technically a subsidiary, a passion project I ran at a small profit to keep my hands in the trade I loved. We formalized the legal separation, ensuring that every nail, every truck, every tool belonging to Mark's Quality Builds was documented as a corporate asset of Sterling. The house we lived in was transferred from my name into the Sterling Corporate Trust. The cars were re-registered as company vehicles. On paper, Mark the contractor was slowly becoming a man with no personal assets of significant value. He was just an employee of his own small company. The turning point came when David's own investigators, separate from Miller, delivered their report on Julian. Her lover, the suave investment banker, was a complete fraud. He ran a small-scale Ponzi scheme, preying on wealthy, dissatisfied women. He had a string of them in 3 different states. His entire lifestyle was funded by his victims. He wasn't her ticket to a better life. He was a parasite, and Chloe was his current host. David and I met again in his office. "We have a choice here," he said, laying out the file on Julian. "We can use this information as leverage in the divorce, or we can take a more proactive approach." I looked at the file. I saw the names of other women he had defrauded, the lives he had ruined. My argument was with Chloe. This man was a predator. "We don't use it as leverage," I said. "We burn him to the ground the next day." A thick, anonymous envelope containing detailed evidence of Julian's financial crimes was delivered to the desk of the top prosecutor at the Securities and Exchange Commission. Another copy went to the state attorney general. We didn't have to wait long. A week later, I was at home, reading over some blueprints, when Chloe burst through the door. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with panic. Her phone was pressed to her ear. "What do you mean your accounts are frozen?" she shrieked into the phone. "That's impossible. What about the Henderson deal? Julian? Julian? Are you there?" She pulled the phone away from her ear and stared at it. "He hung up on me," she whispered, her voice trembling. I looked up from my blueprints, feigning mild concern. "Everything all right, honey?" She stared at me, her mind clearly racing. The panic in her eyes was quickly being replaced by a cold, calculating look. Her escape route was gone. Julian was compromised. She was trapped. Her gaze fell on me, the reliable, simple builder. Her plan B. "It's nothing," she said, forcing a shaky smile. "Just a business hiccup. It's fine," but I knew in that moment that her strategy had changed. The extraction was off. The new plan was reconciliation. Her transformation over the next few days was remarkable. Suddenly, she was interested in my work. She started making my favorite meals. She suggested we go away for a weekend, just the 2 of us. To reconnect, it was a masterful performance. And if I hadn't known what was happening behind the scenes, I might have been fooled. But I saw the desperation behind her eyes. I saw the fear. Julian had ghosted her, his fraudulent world collapsing, and she was scrambling back to the safety of the life she so thoroughly despised. She tried to become the perfect wife, but it was too late. I had a mountain of evidence and a team of lawyers ready to move. I rebuffed her advances gently, blaming stress from work. My distance, which she had once welcomed, now drove her into a state of near-constant anxiety. The more I pulled away, the more desperately she tried to close the gap, showering me with a cloying affection that turned my stomach. Finally, David gave me the green light. All our preparations were complete. It was time to make the first move. I decided against a big confrontation at home. That would be messy, emotional. I needed a neutral setting. I asked her to meet me for dinner at a quiet Italian restaurant we used to go to for anniversaries. She was thrilled, seeing it as a sign that her efforts were working. She dressed up, wore the perfume I had bought her years ago. She was smiling, hopeful, as we sat down at a corner table. I let her talk through the appetizers, listening to her chatter about her friends, her work, her renewed desire for us to be a team again. I let her spin her web of lies, giving her enough rope to hang herself twice over. Then, as the waiter cleared our plates, I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a single piece of paper. I slid it across the table. It was a copy of a hotel bill. The charge was for a suite at the Regent Grand, for 2 nights. On the weekend she was supposedly at a yoga retreat with her mother. The bill was from 3 months ago. She looked at it. The color drained from her face. I don't understand, she stammered, her eyes darting around as if looking for an escape. It was charged to our joint credit card, I said, my voice calm and even. The hotel is downtown. Your mother's house is in the suburbs. It's a long commute for a yoga retreat. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The simple, undeniable fact on the piece of paper was louder than any shout. Her composure shattered. The mask of the loving wife dissolved, replaced by the panicked, cornered animal underneath. You're spying on me? She hissed, her voice low and venomous. You went through my things? How dare you? After everything I do for this marriage, you don't trust me. It was a classic deflection, an attempt to turn my discovery into an attack on my character. I didn't take the bait. I'm not the one who spent 2 nights in a hotel suite with another man, Chloe, I said simply. I stood up, placing a few bills on the table to cover the meal. You'll be served with divorce papers tomorrow. I suggest you find a lawyer. I turned and walked out of the restaurant, leaving her sitting there, the hotel bill on the table like a verdict. The next 2 weeks were a storm of frantic calls, hysterical text messages, and tearful voicemails. Chloe cycled through every tactic in the manipulator's playbook. There were apologies, declarations of undying love, and accusations that I was a cruel, controlling monster for throwing our marriage away over one silly mistake. She even sent her mother to our house to try and reason with me. I met her on the porch and politely told her that any future communication would need to go through my lawyer. I had moved permanently into the guest room, creating a cold, silent barrier in our home. Finally, she hired a lawyer and the official process began. Her first move was exactly what David had predicted. She filed for an emergency order to freeze all our assets and demanded exclusive use of the house. Her lawyer, a man named Peterson, was aggressive. He painted a picture of me as a moderately successful but emotionally distant contractor and Chloe as the supportive wife who had sacrificed her own career ambitions for my sake. They demanded half of my business, the house, 2 cars, and substantial lifelong alimony. They were operating under the assumption that Mark's quality builds, and the house we lived in constituted the entirety of our net worth. They had no idea they were trying to claim a bucket of sand from a man who owned the entire beach. We agreed to a 4-way mediation meeting. Me and David, and Chloe and her lawyer Peterson. Chloe arrived looking like a grieving widow, dressed in black, her face pale and sorrowful. Her mother waited in the lobby, ready to provide moral support. Chloe's strategy was clear. Play the victim, appeal to my sense of history and guilt, and if that failed, let her lawyer bully me into a settlement. Peterson began the proceedings with a long, rambling speech about the sanctity of marriage and the emotional toll the divorce was taking on his client. He spoke of Chloe's immeasurable contributions as a homemaker and partner. He presented her as a woman who had stood by her hard-working husband, only to be cast aside. It was a compelling work of fiction. I sat silently, my hands resting on the polished table, and let him finish. Chloe watched me, her eyes pleading. When he was done, David cleared his throat. "Thank you for that, Mr. Peterson," he said, his voice calm and professional. "We appreciate your client's perspective. However, we have a slightly different view of the facts." He opened his briefcase and took out a single, slim file folder. "Before we discuss the division of assets, I think it's important to establish a baseline of conduct during the marriage." He looked directly at Chloe. "Chloe, do you recognize the name Julian Croft?" Peterson immediately objected, but David held up a hand. "This is a mediation, not a courtroom. We're here to find the truth. Or would you prefer we do this in front of a judge?" Chloe paled but nodded for him to continue. David then began to systematically deconstruct her life over the past year. He started with the hotel bill from the restaurant. Then he produced the private investigator's reports. He laid out a series of glossy 8 by 10 photographs on the table. Chloe and Julian at lunch. Chloe and Julian kissing in a parking garage. Chloe and Julian entering the Regent Grand Hotel, hand in hand. With each photo, a little more of the color drained from Chloe's face. Peterson looked at his client, his own confidence beginning to waver. These could be anything," Peterson stammered. "A friendship, a business relationship." "A business relationship?" David asked, raising an eyebrow. He then pulled a small digital audio recorder from his briefcase and placed it on the table. "In that case, perhaps this will clarify the nature of their partnership." He pressed play. The voice memo filled the silent room. Julian's arrogant drawl, Chloe's cruel, dismissive laughter. Her words. "He has no clue. He just works, eats, and sleeps." It's almost sad. Hung in the air like poison. Chloe stared at the recorder as if it were a snake, her mouth opening and closing silently. Peterson's jaw was tight. He looked at Chloe with a new, colder expression. He had been lied to. That's been edited. It's fake." Chloe finally managed to gasp. "We have a certified digital forensics expert who will testify to its authenticity," David said smoothly. "He will also testify that it was sent from your phone to Mark's phone on the evening of October 12th. But perhaps you'd prefer to discuss your financial partnership with Mr. Croft." He slid a thick binder across the table. "This is the forensic accountant's report. It details $117,000 in unauthorized transfers and credit card charges from your joint accounts over the past 18 months, a significant portion of which we have tracked to accounts and vendors directly associated with Mr. Croft, who, I believe, is currently under federal investigation for investment fraud." Chloe made a small, choking sound. Peterson opened the binder and his eyes widened as he scanned the first few pages. The game was over. They both knew it. Chloe's narrative of the wronged, devoted wife had been utterly demolished. She was exposed as an adulterer and a thief. "All right," Peterson said, closing the binder and pushing it back across the table. He dropped the sympathetic act. His voice was all business now. "My client has made some errors in judgment. That doesn't change the fact that she is entitled to her share of the marital assets. The business, the house. Under state law, that's 50%. He was trying to salvage something, anything, from the wreckage. This was the moment I had been waiting for. This was the final act." David leaned back in his chair and gave a small, almost imperceptible smile. "This is where we seem to have a fundamental misunderstanding," he said. "You're assuming there are marital assets to divide," Peterson scoffed. "Don't be ridiculous. Mark's Quality Builds is a successful company. We've had it valued. And the house is worth at least $2 million. "That's true," David agreed. "However, you've made a critical error in your assessment. You see, Mark doesn't actually own Mark's Quality Builds. He's merely the salaried general manager." He slid another set of documents across the table. "The company, its tools, its vehicles, and its accounts are, and always have been, a wholly owned subsidiary of Sterling Developments, a corporation established by Mark's family trust 8 years before he even met your client." He let that sink in for a moment. Chloe and Peterson stared at the documents, their brows furrowed in confusion. "And the house," David continued, his voice relentlessly calm, "was transferred into the Sterling Corporate Trust 3 months ago to cover an outstanding business liability. It is a corporate asset. Mark is simply permitted to live there as part of his compensation package." As of tomorrow, that privilege will be revoked. The silence in the room was absolute. Chloe was looking back and forth between the documents and my face, her expression one of utter disbelief. The big, dumb builder was fading from her eyes, being replaced by a stranger she had never known. This is fraud, Peterson sputtered, though his voice lacked conviction. He knew the documents were ironclad. Not at all, David said. It's just smart estate planning. Mark wanted to ensure he was loved for who he was, not what he was worth. A goal I think we can all agree has been clarified by recent events. He turned his attention to Chloe. You own no part of the business. You have no claim on the house. The cars are leased by the corporation. The funds you embezzled from the joint accounts will need to be repaid. Given the clear evidence of adultery and financial misconduct, your claim for alimony is, to put it mildly, optimistic. He paused, letting the full weight of her situation settle upon her. You are entitled to exactly 50% of the remaining balance of the joint savings account, which, after accounting for the funds you need to repay, comes to a grand total of $2,154. Chloe's face crumpled. The reality of her miscalculation finally hit her with the force of a physical blow. She hadn't just cheated on her husband. She had cheated on a multimillionaire. She had thrown away a life of unimaginable luxury and security for a cheap fraudster who was now in jail. She had traded a diamond for a piece of broken glass, and in the process had lost everything. A terrible, guttural sob escaped her lips. It was not a sound of sadness, but of pure, unadulterated rage and loss. You lied to me, she screamed, her voice cracking. You let me believe you were just a contractor. For 10 years. I spoke for the first time since the meeting began. My voice was quiet, devoid of anger or triumph. I never lied to you, Chloe, I said, meeting her gaze. I am a contractor. I build things. That's the truth. You just never bothered to ask what else I do. You saw what you wanted to see. She lunged across the table then, a wild, desperate attempt to claw at me, but Peterson caught her arm. She collapsed back into her chair, her face buried in her hands, her body racked with shuddering sobs of defeat. Her mother burst into the room, alerted by the shouting, and her face fell as she took in the scene. Her daughter broken, the lawyers silent, the damning photos still spread across the table. I stood up. My part in this was over. I had deconstructed our life together, piece by piece, and all that was left was the truth. I gave a slight nod to David, who began packing his briefcase. I didn't look at Chloe again. I turned and walked out of the room, out of the building, and into the afternoon sun. I didn't feel happy. I didn't feel sad. I just felt quiet. The storm had passed. A week later, I stood on the 52nd floor of a new skyscraper going up downtown, a flagship project for Sterling Developments. The wind whipped around me, but I felt grounded. Below me, the city hummed with life. I was looking at a set of blueprints, the plans for a new beginning, both for the building and for me. My phone buzzed. It was a text from David. Chloe had accepted the settlement. She had taken the $2,000 and signed everything. She had also been served with an eviction notice and had 30 days to vacate the house. It was over. I put the phone away and looked out at the horizon. For a long time, I had built my life around someone else's happiness, and in doing so, I had almost lost myself. Chloe thought my value was in what I could provide her. She never understood that a person's real worth is in their character, their integrity. It's the foundation upon which everything else is built. Her foundation was rotten, and it had collapsed just as it was always going to. Mine was made of steel, and I was ready to build again.